All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session of the 2024 College Sport Communicators CSC U Summit. We want to thank you all for joining our session on building your confidence and setting professional boundaries. Each of our 4 live summit sessions is hosted by College Sport Communicators CSCU Committee to assist new communication professionals, undergraduate students, graduate students, and interns interested in a sports communication career with continuing education sessions. The CSCU motto is to educate educators and find our future. My name is Lynn Walsh. I am the Director of Communications and Creative Content at the College of Charleston, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this session. As a reminder, we welcome your questions at any time. Go ahead and place them as they arise in the Q&A session. So not the chat session, the Q&A session, and we'll make sure to get through those as our panelists talk about these subjects as we get going today. We've got a lot to cover, so we want to go ahead and get started. As a reminder, we are recording this Zoom session. It'll be available on our CSC website and YouTube channel later today, so you can watch it whenever you please. We've got a superstar panel here today. I'll have them introduce themselves, their title, institution, and how long they have been in the industry, and then we'll get going. Shawn, you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure, I can start us off, Lynn. Thank you. Shawn Medeiros, Director of Sports Information at Endicott College, which is about 40 minutes north of Boston in Beverly, Massachusetts, and I'm in my 9th year at Endicott College. It's a Division III institution.
Sydney?
I was going to ask if you wanted me to go. Hi, I'm Sydney Anderson. I'm the Director of Athletics Communications at Washington and Lee. I just finished my 2nd year here as a director and spent 6 years at Shenandoah University as an assistant prior to that, both Division III institutions in the Old Dominion Athletic Conference.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Lombardo, the Director of Sports Information and Operations at Alvernia University, a Division III school about an hour west of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Technically, I'm in my 3rd year in my current position, but I've been with Alvernia for going on 11 years now. Started as an undergrad and never left.
So we've got a lot of wide ranges of experience up here, and they're ready to give you guys their tips and tricks into building your confidence and setting boundaries. This is a super huge skill as you are entering athletic communications and sports information, no matter what division you're at. It's important to come into the job and believe in yourself and have the confidence to do so. And that can be daunting, and this realm is no different. Every school and department presents its own unique sets of challenges with coworkers, coaches, student athletes, whatever it might be. And in this session, we really want to focus on building that confidence in your work while also setting boundaries both professionally and personally. And a big part of that kind of oversees everything we want to get to today is building those relationships with coaches and administrators. Shawn, what are some tips that you would give to newcomers in the profession of just getting those relationships started from the ground up?
Yeah, so I can think of my time when I started at Endicott. Prior to that, I was at Wheaton for about 2 years, which is D3, and then Stonehill as an assistant. And as a graduate student, I was at Castleton, which is in Vermont. When I started at Endicott, what I tried to do, did I hit every coach? No, but the thought process was setting up half-hour to hour kind of session with the coach, starting off there, understanding what their goals are for the program, what their program like ethos is, learning more about them, not just taking it in terms of, all about their program, whatever the sport is, and just trying to use that hour or half-hour session to kind of learn about them, their program, but also let them know who I am, what I'm looking to do and accomplish in the role. I was in a unique scenario where I was essentially moving into the director of sports information role, and then I had an AD for strategic communication above me. So there was already a great baseline of what was being done at a high level from Rob Pilardi, who went on to work with our college in a numerous amount of roles. So I wanted to kind of establish my foothold, if you will. So those hour sessions with the coaches, some of them were formal, some of them were informal, but it really allowed me to sort of tell them my strategies and what I've accomplished or what I've been experiencing, and then looking to see what they were looking to do. And that really kind of set me up for success moving forward. You kind of get everything out of the way in that kind of mini meeting session. And then you have to make sure you follow through on the things that you talked about in those meetings. So, if a program is talking about, we don't get X or Y, or this seems a little inconsistent from other programs, and you tell them that's going to be one of your goals moving forward, you got to make sure that's on your sort of master list of things you're going to accomplish that year. Because coaches, much like they evaluate their players or their student athletes, they will do the same with you. So, just making sure that whatever you're talking about, you're following through and being thorough about it.
Yeah, that's great. In those meetings, they also set a standard for yourself with these coaches and how communicative you want to be. Sydney and Marissa, do you guys have any similar experience from when you started at your departments and setting those standards and boundaries?
You want to go?
You go.
Okay. So yeah, I think similar to Shawn, getting those meetings, whether you're entering the role with an existing coaching staff or coach, especially Division III coaching staff can roll over pretty frequently. So then on the reverse side, make sure that as part of the onboarding process when a new coach is joining your staff, that you have that same meeting. Coaches might be coming in from a different institution where things were differently, things were staffed differently. So kind of get an expectation of where your institution is. And then I always think it's good to attend early parts of a coach's season, regardless of how long they've been there, so that both them and the athletes can know you, recognize you, and then you kind of get that relationship kind of set from the beginning each year.
Yeah, to follow up with that, I think it's really important to also go into their first meeting of the season, just to kind of tell the student athletes, this is who you are. You care about them. You're like their number 3 fan behind their coaches and their parents, and you're here for them. But really just setting the expectations of, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to write a release for every game. I do the game day posts and things like that. And I think it's important to have those written down, maybe not for the student athletes, but definitely for the coaches, just so the coaches know, hey, you got player of the week. You can expect a release, a graphic, etc. And I think having like a game plan kind of helps them put it into perspective of what your role will be and how you are going to cover their team and promote themselves. And I think they appreciate having that ahead of time.
And that's always super helpful too, is making sure the student athletes know what you do. I think even myself today, I was talking to a new student athlete and just describe myself as I do the social media, right? Because we think that they can't comprehend what we do, and that's not true at all. So make sure that you also advocate for yourself and all the things that you are actually doing. And I'll throw this next question out to any of our 3 panelists, but how do you deal and prioritize with those requests that are coming from coaches after you set those boundaries and those standards? Whether that be they are going to what you and the coach talked about initially and how we're going to run their program and how we're going to run their season, or maybe they're not, right? And maybe this isn't what we talked about at the beginning, and keeping those requests coming in while aligning with our boundaries.
Sydney, you want to take that one first? Then I'll jump in since I started first.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I think when requests come in, I think it's important to see things from the coach's point of view. And if you personally don't see value in something like that you have experience with that doesn't really have a strong return on investment, I think if you can ask the coaches or the staff member how they think that project would add value to their program and how they would use it to benefit them. And sometimes coaches maybe are just like, oh, I just think it looks cool, or like school XYZ is doing this. But I think sometimes having them think about it will also have them backtrack and be like, oh, you're right. We already do something very similar to this. I don't think it will add value and have a strong return on investment.
Some other things you can do is, having some sort of content calendar or structure. We've talked about that as a group before, but just kind of giving coaches an understanding of the flow of the year, what comes on Mondays, Tuesdays, later in the week. My coaches know that pretty much anything that comes from my AD automatically goes to the top of the shelf or an assistant AD, and then communicating those things. So if you have, something that's scheduled to come out on Wednesday, but then something moves it, for example, maybe spring academic all conference moves some content on you later in the summer. Just let them know, be upfront, let them know that this is what we're going to do. We have to do that constantly with Instagram, for example, just because we like to post more so 9 a.m. and then 9 p.m. And our coaches have sort of understood that rhythm over the course of the last couple of years. So we'll tell them, hey, this broke, for example, last night. This could be something that happened, but we have two baseball players that transferred to UConn this year. And one of them threw like 7 1/3 last night, shut out number 9 Oklahoma. That's going to move my whole calendar down the road. So if something odd or not planned for happens, as long as you're kind of talking through that and letting your coaches know, they're never going to be upset about it, especially if you're giving reasoning. I think that Sydney talked about it before, but if you're just letting them know the why and kind of where you're coming from in those sort of scenarios, then they're going to understand where things fit. And, maybe they might not be happy about it, but at least you're giving them an understanding of how the flow works.
And I think you can always offer alternatives. So sometimes this might be something that your office can't cover for whatever reason. Like at a D3 school like Alvernia, our coaching staffs are responsible for their own social media pages, which isn't always the case at higher divisions. So sometimes coaches want something specifically for their page only, and that's kind of a general no-go for us. It's got to be a athletics wide post for us to do it, but you can always offer them alternatives. Like if they want a graphic made for something, maybe they're not proficient in Photoshop, but here's Canva, and Canva is a great tool for coaches to use if they're not up to speed on Adobe. And here's your graphics packages and colors that you need to know, so that this is a project, if you really want to do it and we can't handle it, that you can still give a good attempt on your own.
And some things might not be set in stone. Roster posting, for example. I don't know how Sydney, Lynn, and Marissa do it at their schools, but we let the coaches kind of set the tone on when they want to post their roster. I've been at other places where as soon as the season is over, AD wants to turn over the roster, or I've heard of ADs wanting to turn over the roster right after. So it kind of happens based on your institution too. I know that at our place, there are some programs that do it the day before their first game, and there are some programs like our women's basketball program, new coach, she wanted to turn the roster over last week. So which is a little bit new for me. And then football, for example, our previous coach, he was pretty much as soon as they lost the next week, flip that thing over so the recruits can see. Our current coach likes to leave it up there so he can kind of talk to families and say, here's where a roster was last year. This is what we anticipate moving forward. So they kind of use it differently. So that sort of strategy or thought process is going to change based on what you'd like to do, what your coaches are looking for, and then maybe some top-down level type thought process from your AD as well.
Just a reminder, as we continue to work through with our awesome panelists who are giving some pretty deep gems right now of knowledge, make sure that you guys are using the Q&A feature to ask all those questions. That's how we'll kind of filter through, and as you guys send them, we'll answer them. Something that we talked about that Shawn alluded to just a second ago was different coaches are going to have different standards and different things that they want for their program. And part of that, as someone who's entering this profession for the first time, is realizing the world that you're getting into, right? College coaches are very passionate people. They care deeply about what they do, and you are the extension so that the world knows that and sees that. Sydney, I'd love if you could just touch a little bit about protecting the brand and showcasing what coaches want. And along with that, shifting how you do things depending on what coaches want, because your football coach is going to want something different than your men's basketball coach when it comes to that program's brand.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost thing you need to, especially when you're getting somewhere new, is meeting with the communications department for the university wide to make sure the way you are representing your university is aligned with how the university wants to be represented. They are the constituents, right? You guys are selling a product essentially, and you want to make sure the product in theory, overarching is the education and the experience that your student athletes get at your institution. So I think having those aligned, and maybe that's meeting with admissions and alumni as well, to kind of see what is working best for them, and how they want it to be represented. And like Alvernia, we also, our coaches run their own social media pages, so we kind of give them creativity, freedom, And we do meet with them ahead of time just to make sure that they are representing the university in an aligned way with the rest of the university. And it is important to remember that coaches are, their job is relied on the decision making of 18 to 23-year-old brains, whether that's on the field, in the classroom, socially. So there is some stress, and some coaches are very particular about how they want their brand represented. So I think it's very important to try to see things from their perspectives as often as I can. And I think that makes for a very cohesive marriage between the two offices and departments. I don't know if I have more to add, Lynn.
No, that's great. Marissa, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think we at Alvernia, we operate very similar to Sydney, and it's just, if you see something, don't immediately tell the coach, hey, you got to take this down. I mean, sometimes you have to immediately tell the coach, hey, you got to take this down, but you have to give them a reason why and make it kind of an educational tool for them, because their background isn't this, and they care, but they don't care in the same way that we do. So they might see no harm in calling out the conference office when someone didn't get a player of the year, but that's actually a big problem. So we got to tone that back and use it as a learning moment and say, hey, you're still representing not only your team, but yourself and the institution as a whole, and everything you do online, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's through the team account or not. So just kind of keeping that brand in line, because the brand goes beyond the team accounts on social media, because when kids are looking at schools and being recruited, they're also looking up the coach's Twitter I know Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, is huge for specific sports more than others. But those are all places that the brand lives, whether it's intentional or not.
We've got a great question in the chat, and I think, Shawn, I want to direct this one to you since it touched on what we were just talking about with social media. It says, when posting to your main athletic social media page, do you try to divide up the content evenly across all sports, or try to capitalize on a team's success and post them more frequently?
So great question, Drew. For Instagram specifically, I'll just take you through like a normal week. So on a Saturday, unless it's a huge win, over a big nationally ranked opponent or something like that, we combine all the wins together for those teams. And we have the unique scenario where we also have to cover club sports at Endicott. Some of them, thankfully, win national championships, so it makes it a little bit easier to kind of deal with that part of athletic communications, because probably one of few in the country that deal with club sports. But we try and combine everyone together as most as we can. So on a Saturday when we have 8 teams playing, the thought process there is we only post about wins on Instagram. So the sort of the thought process at our school is, our goal is to win conference championships and to get to the NCAA tournament. So we're not highlighting, moral victories against teams. So if you win, you get on Instagram. We take it as deep as looking at the grid constantly. Have we posted football as the lead photo too many times? When's the last time a women's sport has been the lead? When's the last time this specific sport has been the lead? And then, sometimes the imagery will push what's the lead and where the order of the photo pack follows and things like that. But we look at that very intrinsically, how we're promoting the teams, who's being featured the most, or if not. And then sometimes you just have to promote the teams that are winning. But you can get creative in trying to find ways for teams that aren't doing well. Golf, for example, we have an intern in our office that went out to their practice and tried to do some funny like TikTok videos, because we knew that they weren't going to compete a lot throughout the year. And they don't necessarily win every tournament that they go to. So if you can kind of find those gaps, and chart how much you've posted about certain teams and maybe see the math. We do a lot of stuff in Excel where we'll pull in the data and just kind of see some of the raw numbers and try and make decisions based off that. But people are paying attention to those type of things. Coaches will definitely say, hey, women's soccer hasn't been posted enough, or our roller hockey team loves to chirp us when they can about stuff. So if you're looking at social media that way, kind of just seeing the flow of that, and looking to see what teams are being posted, how often, and how you're talking about them as well, the voice within your posts, We have a certain tenor that we like to go with. It's sort of, we expect to win and then we're gracious if we lose kind of thing. And then we tie in a lot of family elements, like our last post College World Series loss. We talked about a lot about the families and showed like photos of our student athletes with their families. So yeah, I think the more you can monitor it and just kind of see the cadence of all of it, the less questions you'll get from coaches on the back end, especially when you can pull up a sheet and say, we've posted about women's soccer this many times, they've been the lead this many times. There's really no argument for a coach to make once they see that raw data.
And the way that Shawn just articulated all of that to you all is exactly what your coaches and administrators need to hear, right? It's logic, it's reasoning, he's got the data. And he admits to, hey, football maybe has been the grid cover too many times, so let's switch it up, right? And it's making sure that everyone is on the same page. I want to switch a little bit. The other part of our session is setting boundaries, and we have two of our panelists work at institutions or previously work at institutions that they also attended. So I'm curious, Marissa, and we'll start with you on this, is how do you set boundaries with those student athletes that you might have been a former student with, or that as you start and as you graduate, you're still young? How do you set those boundaries of that, hey, I'm an employee and I've got a job to do here?
I think once again, I know we might sound like a broken record here, but it always goes back to starting with the coach. I send a preseason email out. In addition to meeting with my coaches, a preseason email goes out with, this is how you communicate with me. I don't necessarily want to hear directly from your student athletes on certain things. I want them to get you involved too as the coach, so you're aware of what they're coming to me about anyway. And then it's kind of, if a kid, I swear over half our athletes have my cell phone number, and I'm getting texts at random times at night. So it's kind of setting that boundary of, you shouldn't be texting me at all, which I'll reply with my email address. Usually shoot me an email here. And then just setting that boundary on social media, like get out of my DMs, email me, that kind of stuff. It takes it almost is second nature, especially your first year or two out, for them just to communicate with you as they always would. And for some things that's still okay, because you might still be friends with them anyway. Like your friendship doesn't end just because, they're a sophomore or a junior now and you're a full-time employee. It's a very odd situation when you never leave. So you just had to be like, hey, if you're communicating with me about this, please do it via email. Please get your coach involved. And then if you want to talk about something personal, then shoot me a text. And I'm at the age now where that's ended for the most part. My assistant though also went here, and he's in that phase now. So it's kind of, he's like, so-and-so snapped me the other day about a question on stats. I'm like, okay, Snapchat's got to be taken out of the game. That's got to be an email type of deal. So it's kind of not second nature to him either. He saw nothing wrong with the Snapchat. So it's kind of, and Snapchat's such a normal form of communication, but you just need the email chain of everything. And you want the coaches to know what their kids are coming to you about. And is it something that the coach needs to rein in, or is it something that's an okay form of communication?
Right. I'll back on that with Marissa. When I was at Shenandoah, I mostly, it was scoring decisions and why didn't you use me for the social media kind of stuff. And I think, again, it comes back to the coaches. You need to make your boundaries clear to the coaches and then just reiterate it with the student athletes. I highly recommend a protocol for stat changes if your institution does not have one already, and it's got to go through the coach. That way, that kind of takes away like rogue parent emails as well and visiting parent emails. If I ever get an email, I just say, hey, thanks for bringing this to our attention. All stat changes actually come from coaching staff. So if the coach brings it up, I will look at it. But a lot of the times coaches included and players don't really understand the ruling decisions behind the statistics and what kind of qualifies for manual sake. So I think a good way to do that is also to educate. I had a defender come in last year pretty frequently and asked for ground balls in lacrosse, and we had to explain that just because the ball was on the ground, because there was a foul and you picked up the ground ball does not mean that it is a ground ball because play was stopped and it was not a live action activity. So I think education, and getting the coaches on board is the best way. But sometimes, especially if you go into a place where you went as a student athlete and start working there, coaches sometimes see you as student athletes still. So I think trying to, separate yourself from the student athlete mindset and then a peer mindset is important. And that goes along with like going out to coffee and having meetings with them and things like that, and building a personal relationship outside of the student athlete coach realm.
Yeah, one thing that I was taught long ago was whenever someone asks, whether it's a coach or an athletic director, an administrator, if you are invited somewhere, so you're invited to go get coffee, you're invited to lunch, if it's after game and you're invited to go get a drink, right? Those things are going to come up, even if you don't drink alcohol, even if you don't like coffee, even if you don't like the place that they've offered to take you, go, right? Figure it out, find something to do, because take advantage of those opportunities to help them get to know you and to set those boundaries and expectations and show that you care about the program and you want to spend time with them and get to know more about them and what they care about. We've got another good question. We've got a ton of good questions in the Q&A and we're going to get to them all, but have one here. Sydney, if I could tack this one on to you. For those still in undergraduate and GA positions, what advice do you have to best support a department's director or supervisor and to start asking for more responsibility?
Yeah, I honestly, to ask questions, to get as much knowledge as you can and ask for, just be vocal about it. Be like, hey, I noticed you are working on this social media post. Do you mind showing me how to use Photoshop so I can start making them in the future? Or, hey, do you mind if I start making our department a content calendar? If that's something that you have noticed that your department does not do, either ask why or ask if you can do it, because there could be an intentional reason that your department does not do something. But if it's something that's lacking, that could be just lack of resources, and you could be the resource.
Shawn and Marissa?
I think it has to get involved in stuff you don't see your peers doing, especially if you're still an undergrad. The way I got into this position was at Alvernia, sports information staffs all aspects of a game day down to ball runners and scoreboard operators, and nobody was ever getting staffed in this stat position. I could see on the schedule that was always just marked as TBA, and I learned that it was because nobody wanted to do it. So I was like, hey, I'm interested in this. I'll try that. Like, can I try this? And that's how I got my foot in the door my freshman year. I didn't really want to be a ball runner, but I wanted to get involved in athletics as a whole. And you find the job that nobody else is doing and see what it's all about. And then that's a great way to show the supervisor that you're proactive and kind of have that work ethic, that you're willing to do whatever needs to be done.
And I would say in the GA position, before you go to ask for those things, whatever has been asked of you, make sure you're getting that part done consistently so that you have that baseline to say, hey, I've been handling these tasks well the last month. I'd like to take on a little more or learn in this area. That's always fun when a GA asks, I don't know anything about this, but I want to learn about it. How can I do that? And then how can this also help the department? That will go a long way if you're going to take a lift off. And then sometimes there might be some smaller tasks that a director might not want to do. Like maybe you build the rosters in Stat Crew or the website rosters in Presto or what have you for more than just your team if teams are assigned. And then maybe taking that off their plate allows the director to do a little bit more. The director is going to come back and say, hey, you did a great job doing this. Maybe, something that you've wanted to learn. Now we have more time to do it together and learn together that way. So you can kind of take all of those approaches, and usually over time, it's going to benefit the whole department.
Absolutely. And that's being good at what you are supposed to do and then showing the will and the want to get better at that. I think a lot of times too, as young professionals come into this industry, it can be hard to kind of stay the course and to have faith in your work, right? And to be open to those new ideas and critiques, whether that be from your direct supervisor or for someone else in the department. What are some tips? And I would love to hear from all three of you on this. Maybe Marissa, if you can get us started on how to stay positive in your work, even when those critiques and criticisms are coming in.
I think it's always going to be proud of what you do. Like if you know you put your whole effort into doing what you're doing, then if the critique comes in, don't take it too personally. You know you did your best. If you're not and you do feel that guilt about it, maybe you need to take a look and see what could I be doing better here. Most criticism that comes our way hopefully is in a constructive way. Coaches, like we said earlier, they want to see the brand, they want to see the university do well and portray their programs well. So if they're coming to you saying that's not necessarily happening, like take a look back in and see maybe it's not. Look at it through their eyes and say, all right, I kind of see where they're coming from. I could spin it a little bit better here. And kind of just work from there. And then some stuff you just have to learn to brush off. Parents are going to parent. They're not, most often if they're talking to you, if they're emailing you, it's not usually a good thing. So kind of just understand that that just is kind of how things are, especially as I think it's gotten a little worse over the last 4 to 5 years. Parents just sometimes be walking into the press box and being like, you missed the tackle for my son. And it's like, you have got to go pound sand out there. So just setting those boundaries too with the parents and coaches, but just be proud of what you do. And if you have confidence in what you're doing, then you shouldn't have too much to be ashamed of if the criticism comes your way.
Sydney?
Sorry, I was reading the questions that are coming in. My bad. Oh gosh, I can't remember what we were on because I was reading.
How to keep confidence, right? That you're
Oh
doing
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
momentum and you're
Okay,
going to
yep,
receive
sorry.
criticism.
Sorry, everybody. Keeping confidence is hard, especially and again, everyone's like university has different constituents, right? WNL is like has a very unique population that I work with. And it is hard because I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. Like any room I'm in with the 18-year-olds or anything, they're just all brilliant. So it is hard to keep your confidence that way when you are getting like, hey, this is grammatically incorrect. And you're like, well, what about all the other words that were grammatically correct? Like, come on, like give me some love here. But no, I do think it is like being proud of your work. And also I think you need to take with a grain of salt because coaches, parents, student athletes, grandmas, grandpas, family members don't necessarily understand the job and all of the roles that you actually do. I think they think that one person does one thing and that's like they need to be an expert at that thing, but really we're like multi-tools where we can write, we can create graphics, we do video broadcasting, we have to do PA announcing, we have to know statistic manuals from the front and back for 28 sports, right? So I think it's just knowing that you are good at lots of different things, even if you aren't the best at one thing. Because I think that is a very hard skill set, and I think it's one that's not recognized very often or appreciated outwardly.
No, and especially given our side of the profession where it's a faux pas to almost celebrate yourself or talk about doing things well. I think that's a part of the industry that is always kind of in flux. But to Marissa and Sydney's point, if you can find your wins throughout the week, you learn something new. Maybe you further developed a relationship with a coach. Maybe you learn more in a stat manual that you didn't know. Maybe you learn more about softball scoring or something. It's okay to celebrate those wins internally and kind of build those up slowly because there's always going to be a scenario where a parent's going to be angry or something's not going to go right or you mess something up. So if you can keep reminding yourself, hey, I did all of this well, or I got better at this week, or I attained, these soft goals for this month, it goes a long way towards the psyche throughout the year because it's a long one for sure.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into some of the questions we have here. And as a reminder, continue to send those in using the Q&A feature. And we'll start with this one. Just as an undergraduate and graduate assistant, how do you keep a good work-life balance? And I think if we look at the first part of that question, it's especially important to figure that out and what works for you at the early stages of your career. And it's a little bit different for everyone. I know for myself, I'm a big planner and a big scheduler. I use my Outlook calendar pretty religiously. So I have even the small tasks of the day, like to do my golf bios today. That was a calendar block for me. And if I finish something, I'll move ahead to tomorrow's tasks that I've set in front of for myself. But right, that can get hard sometimes. And that's also leaving time to understand that the requests at 7 p.m. are going to come in at sometimes, right? The requests at 6 a.m., they are going to come in, right? And that's understanding the balance of the industry you are in too. And like we talked on earlier, that coaches are passionate people and they sometimes don't know what time it is. And it's having that understanding as well that they don't know what's going on, right? I heard another tip sometimes, I think it was at convention last year, and I hope some of you are going to continue with these sessions and attending those. But sometimes people are responding to emails because that's when they can get to the email. They're not expecting a response from you at that moment. It's important to know that people are doing it on their schedule and there might not be disrespecting yours. But at the flip side, it is important to set those boundaries. Would love to hear, Shawn, kind of how you worked in your younger days to keep a work-life balance and some tips that you had.
I was probably horrible at this, to be honest. So, Lynn, I wish I would have heard what you just said when I was like 15 years, 10 years younger. I think Lynn makes a great point about you don't have to answer it if you get it right away. I still struggle with that a little bit now, even being in year 9 at Endicott in double digits. I think having a baby in tow now, 7 months has changed that for me. I'm not exactly answering everything at every time. So that's a big one. But as a GA, I think we get caught in sort of like the battle of like wanting to do more and prove yourself and everything like that. But if you kind of communicate, with your director, hey, like Sundays is my family time, or like Sundays we always do this with my family. If I could be sort of left alone or do that sort of thing, that would be great. In my earlier days, I tried to use Monday as a longer day in the office. So to really get like my roster set up, game programs, my plan of attack for the week. And then I would let my boss know that I might come in a little bit later during the later parts of the week, especially on a Friday, if we're going to have a ton of games Saturday, because I did all the upfront work on Monday or even Sunday evening, but I don't recommend the Sunday part. Take that time if you can. So trying to think as a graduate assistant, that's sort of how it flowed. When I was at Stonehill as an assistant, thankfully my boss at that time, once I earned his trust, I was able to kind of come in and go as I pleased. Work from home really wasn't a concept all that much back then. But I kind of had a little bit more flexible hours. So if you can sort of have that conversation up front, see how that works. If you have a boss who's more 9 to 5, then try and figure out some ways around it. But maybe Sydney and Marissa will be better served for this question. I definitely struggled with it because there were times where I got so like deeply involved in a project, I wanted to see it through, and it almost became like, too attached to it. So I think over time I've sort of learned to step back a little bit, but it's definitely something I still struggle with a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually the opposite of Shawn. On Mondays, those are the days that I kind of take the morning off and do laundry. A lot of times we have Sunday games, especially at D3 institutions, with if you only have like one field for field hockey, lacrosse, soccer, and football, your Saturdays and Sundays can be packed. So I try to take Mondays off in the morning at least, because I know Monday afternoon, that's when players of the week are going to hit. And then I try to get all of my, my roster sent out. And I have found that doing an email template is huge, because you could just be like, hey, here's all of my rosters that you need for this week. And you send them to the rest. Like if your soccer team's playing 3 away games that week, you send them all on one email, and then obviously personalize it. Don't just do copy and paste. That's weird. People can tell. And then if you have heavy Wednesday schedule, come in late on Thursday. Make a calendar and have your kind of routines, and that kind of helps with if coaches ask you for something on a Thursday or ask you on Wednesday to have something done by Thursday, you can be like, hey, I don't really have time in my schedule for this right now. Maybe can we adjust this or meet about this on Friday, and just, have a routine, I think is important. Marissa, you got anything?
Taking notes from you guys. We had this is actually, to be honest, one of the hardest years we've had. We have a lot more sports in the winter. We had a women's wrestling and women's bowling. For those of you familiar with it, those sports play on Sundays. And school reporting is not great. So most of that is happening Sunday nights. And then the weather in the Northeast was just terrible in the spring. So we played every Sunday. I think this year baseball or softball or a combination of the two were playing on Sunday because they got rained out on Saturdays. So it's, and I have a boss who's a little bit more on the I want you here in the office 9 to 5 side. So it's kind of taking a little bit more time out of the day to more slow down. I still come in, but I'm not necessarily in a rush as high on top of things as I would be on a game day or getting stuff prepped for that. I try to take Monday as the quote unquote easier things. I do my work study schedule, get payroll done, and then by the time afternoon hits, it's player of the week time. So this knowing what your routine is kind of helps so that each week isn't a shock to the system, and you kind of know what each day looks like, especially for those of you who have football. Football weeks especially football home weeks can be a lot. So just knowing this is what I'm going to do on Monday, this is what I'm going to do Tuesday, Wednesday, and so you're not overwhelmed by it, would be my recommendation.
And this can tie into
one
another.
One more. Turn
Oh,
on
yeah.
your red receipts so you don't feel
Oh, yeah.
obligated to respond right away.
Yeah, use those Apple tips and tricks that they give you. Do not disturb, all those fun things. And this kind of flows nicely into another question we have. And this has personally been something that I've experienced this summer of a new coaching staff and a new roster coming into your sport. So you've got all new players that you have to get on the website, releases, recruits, and those visitings are happening on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So this attendee asks, how do you go about setting boundaries between personal time off while also trying to assist them in recruiting and that recruiting schedule? I have been at a Division III institution and I'm currently at a Division I institution, and they are very similar and very different, mostly in the sports that you're working with. And I work primarily with men's basketball here, and I'm not as in tuned, admittedly, with the other sports like I was at a D3 that I was fully invested in all of them. And we had a turnover in our men's basketball program this summer. And the way I always describe it to someone is October through April, like I'm in it. And those other months are when I get a little bit of a break. So, and when we had this new staff turnover, that extended into May, right? And from my perspective, going through it this summer, that's just something that I had to do. And I had to be ready to leave something and go home and make a quick graphic for a recruit, or I had to go make an itinerary late on a Friday night, right? And that's just those little tiny things that you give up. And when you do those things well, you get in return the boundary on the other side. When you're asked for the requests that mean a lot to the coaching staff at those weird hours, right? You then earn the respect and the trust, and you earn in the future to create those boundaries that they know you have because you're doing a good job, right? And that's one of those things that's just kind of part of the process, that it's tough and it's a long month, but then you can reward yourself on the back end that now we have a team, right? And it's important to me too, to get that team out, right? That we were getting players, we were creating a roster. It was all new here at Charleston. And it was also a part of my job to make that happen no matter the time or day. So it's kind of one of those things that it's going to disrupt. And if that's going to be right, that's one of those give or take of you're getting into the industry, like we talked about earlier, is understanding the environment that you're choosing to enter, whether that be good or not. I don't know if Marissa, Shawn, or Sydney, you have experience on kind of new coaching staffs coming in the summer and hitting the ground running. And if not, that's okay.
I think I still try to, we haven't had it much in the recent years. We did have a summer where we had 4 new head coaches all start within 2 weeks, and all 4 kind of wanted different things. And that's kind of where you would still, even if it's a new coaching staff, you still have boundaries that you set and timelines that you set, and we stick to them. And especially for fall sports, because that's the one that can really trickle into what is our downish time in the summer. Like we have set a policy that fall rosters don't go up until based on when data play starts, that basically your first week of camp. If you survive the first week of camp and you're still on the team, then we'll go putting the rosters up, because we don't want to waste time on somebody getting their headshot taken, getting their bio up, getting them on the roster, position assigned, and all that kind of stuff if you're not going to be here in 72 hours. So there's kind of a threshold they have to meet in the fall for us to get them on the website. And that doesn't really change regardless of who the coach is, because that's kind of something more the university has set into place even before I started. But the winter and spring sports is where it can get tricky, because you don't want basketball taking up a ton of your time in early September when you're really trying to start the focus on getting fall sports off the ground and the early parts of their season. So saying, hey, rosters will start going up on this date every year. barring some major issue. Like, we all have to be flexible at the end of it and say, if something happened with so-and-so, or something happened where we had our entire men's volleyball team leave. We don't have men's volleyball anymore. So we had to take steps outside of the boundaries that we've set to kind of adapt on the fly. But for the most part, especially at D3, there are some set dates that you can keep working with, and coaches just have to hopefully have that understanding that this is when this happens each year.
Right. I don't know if this anonymous attendee is referring to kind of the D3 social media way where coaches are in charge of their own, but we use Gipper, and I know there's Box Out, there's, you know, thousands of template services. And a lot of times those template services do have like customer service and customer support that can train the coaching staff on how to use them and kind of give them the tools they need to be successful in social media endeavors to help with the recruiting schedule. Because I know a lot of coaches like to release their recruits in the same way that a D1 would like to do. So that's a way to help assist. And again, I think it all goes back to communicating, be like, hey, you want your roster done, I can have it done as long as it fits within your program's kind of model, the way that Alvernia does, or we actually go all the way, we do all of our stuff up front, because I find it easier just to delete people as they drop like flies, if they drop like flies. So we spend 2 weeks updating rosters and things like that. So yeah, I think if you give them a timeline, be like, hey, I can get your roster updated and I can do your bios by, if you give me 2 days here, I can do it then. And just communicating that and be like, I have a family plan or vacation scheduled for this. Again, it's not always possible in Lynn's case for D1 big time. So.
And keep those questions coming in, guys. We got a lot of good ones here, and I promise I'm going to try to run through all of them. Shawn, I've got a good one here of this call a lot of GAs, interns, students trying to enter the profession full time, and kind of switching gears a little bit here. What is your advice to those group applying for those full-time positions and maybe staying positive when they're not getting the responses that they're looking for?
I think research is key first. So if you're applying for positions, you should sort of be tailoring your resume towards what the office might be doing well. You know, there are certain SIDs who are going to want the traditional stuff, see the stat crew right up in front. What kind of sports have you done? What have you called? What have you inputted? Or they might want more of the new media type stuff. So really looking at that job resume or that job rec, right? And tailoring your resume towards that type of part of it first. So up front, you can kind of see, you know, what as the hiring manager, because we have to hire GAs every 2 years. I want to see that up front. Obviously, there's the small things. Make sure the grammar is good. Make sure you're not copy pasting a template and the name's not wrong. But really doing your research. So when you're doing that cover letter, you can kind of discuss what your skills are and how it would help that department moving forward. And try not to get discouraged. I was in a scenario as trying to apply to a GA where I didn't have probably the experience of the people in the room here. Certainly not on a webinar like this. I kept a log of rejections, and at one point it became deflating. So stop doing that. But, you know, you just have to kind of, you know, keep at it. Just be confident in the fact that something will land. Everyone's also looking for something different. You know, one scenario, our GA 2 years ago, we had a scenario where we had 2 very strong candidates, but we felt that one of the candidates, we had a better chance to sort of change that individual's life versus the other candidate who, you know, we kind of looked at each other as a committee and said, this person's going to be fine no matter what. You know, if they don't take this job, then they're good. So we went with the other candidate. That person's now at the Big West. The person we didn't take is now at Johns Hopkins. So it all worked out for everybody. So you can't take things personally. There's all sorts of things that departments are looking for that are beyond the skill set. But it all really starts with that resume process. And I'm sure everyone on this panel can attest to it too, but you can cut out a person pretty quickly off their resume or their cover letter just based on what's there, what's not there, grammar, tone, you know, if it's too confident of a resume, or comes across a certain way, you should always have someone peer review your resume. And then when you do your resume, have, like I said, 2 to 3 versions, maybe one that's new media, one that's traditional, and then that one that really just kind of showcases your skill set. So that would be my base advice off of that, Lynn, for sure.
Marissa or Sydney, do you have anything to add for our attendees here that are looking for that first full-time position?
I think just to, Shawn did a great job covering it, but from what I've seen, at least at my institution and some similar ones within our conference, sometimes hiring is really slow. So like, don't get discouraged about not hearing back. Especially at summers on colleges, like when a lot of hiring happens, things are just slow. So you might have to be a little bit more patient than you would be with a job in a quote unquote traditional work setting.
And I'll agree with Shawn's statement that your resume and cover letter is how you get in the stack of papers, right? That you always hear about. That's how you get on the desk. And then it's what you see at first glance. And then from there, it's who do you know? What do you do? What have you done? How can you help make our department better? And how can we help make you better as an individual? We have a question here. We'll circle back to confidence. How do you keep that confidence if maybe you're having a difficult time with those in your office, with your direct supervisor, if maybe you don't see eye to eye, or maybe they're not giving you the freedom that you had hoped for when you had entered this position? Sydney?
I feel like a broken record, communicating, right? And sometimes it's really hard to have tough conversations. Sometimes you got to write down the questions and, have them right in front of you as you're asking them. I think your thoughts are important and valid. And I think sometimes supervisors might not be aware of how they're coming across, or like you're interpreting it as micromanaging, but that's not necessarily how it's being given to you. But tones change everything. And I think it's really important to understand the human being behind the message and not just taking the message for what you think the message is being perceived as. I'm big into like love languages, and I think love languages apply to like the working environment. My assistant or my associate AD, her love language is spreadsheets. So I know if I need to communicate something with her, I need to show some data and things like that. So I think just trying to really understand how someone processes knowledge or feelings and things like that, and kind of addressing it that way. And it is a two-way street for sure. But if you're not communicating how you feel, no one's going to read your mind in that way. It'd be sick if they could, but they can't.
It's a mic drop moment, Sydney.
Love languages, spreadsheets. Bethany will appreciate getting a shout out.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, shout out to Bethany. We're almost wrapping up here in our time. So again, if you have any last questions, I want to roll through these ones we have right now, but please put them in the Q&A session. We'll do kind of a rapid fire here to close things out. We got a question from Katie. Hi, Katie. And I think this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with taking the invite up, getting coffee, going to lunch, but maybe that's not you, right? Maybe that's not your personality. That's not who you are as a person. And that takes a lot to step out of your comfort zone. What advice do you guys have on just stepping out of your comfort zone, right? I think for this specific question here, I would say just make an attempt. Just show your face is a phrase that you like to use a lot, that maybe it's just a 2-minute stop by to say, hey, I can't stick around too long. I've got plans, but I wanted to come say hi. I wanted to come say hi to the team. I just wanted to say, bye, thanks for a good day, and I'll see you back here. Marissa, do you have anything to add on that with maybe that is just stepping out of who you are as a human being?
Yeah, I'm the type of person that doesn't like to go out. I like when my night's over, I prefer to be at home. But sometimes that's with the schedules we work, that's sometimes the only time you have to get to know the people you work with. So especially in the spring, I'm good friends with my women's lacrosse coach. And so she always invites me out to dinner after games. And usually my mind's going right to, I've got this, and this to do, so I can wrap up my night. But I'll hang out with her. And she's one of my closest friends here. So, and she knows I'm going to bring my laptop to the bar and sit out there with it. And she's just got to be okay with being that person at the bar with her laptop out. So just kind of, that's something that's really out of my comfort zone. And I'm okay to say I don't drink. So going to those kind of situations is always unique and odd for me. I don't feel super comfortable with it, but it's how the people you work with get to see you as a human being, outside your office, outside game day, and all that kind of thing. Actually, right before this call, we just had a department lunch. And so I didn't just hang out very long, stopped by, said hello, actually goodbye. Two of our staff were leaving, so we had a little goodbye lunch for them. And then I came back here to do this. So I think people kind of get it. Hopefully they get it, the coaches you work with. But sometimes they're doing it. I think women's cross coach does it to get me out of the office, even though she knows I don't like it. So I think there is always that kind of, they want to see you take a break too. So
And
Also,
that comes from having
free
that relationship.
food.
Sydney, go ahead.
yeah,
Free food.
Free food's
I
always
think-
good.
I think, Shawn, were you on that when I responded on that Facebook page, that Facebook post about like not getting invited to the post-game gatherings? And I was like, just go, right? The student athletes also, I think, just to show your face and maybe take food and go. I think that show, like, student athletes are like, oh, the story's not out yet because XYZ, they're here. They're like baby conversing with parents, but not really. I'm just like, oh, hey, how are you guys? And then like take my food and leave, right? You're showing your face. And I think that's important because I don't think players actually know or parents know who's in the press box, right? So even if you're not like having deep love language conversations with these parents, these moms and dads and grandpas, you're at least there. And I think showing up and dipping out is important, but also like as Marissa was saying, stop by practice. And just like, even if it's for a little bit, just sit on the bleacher. You don't even have to talk to anyone. Just sit on the bleacher, watch their drill. They'll come say hi during the water break and then you can leave.
Yeah, we've got a good question here about working with coaches, right? And that can kind of tie into what we were just talking about of different personalities and stepping outside of your comfort zone. But what is some advice that you guys have if there has maybe been a coach that you don't see eye to eye with because of those personality differences, Shawn?
Well, I wouldn't recommend telling them that you don't get to choose who goes on the field and you would choose differently as a young SID, as I did once. Two Portuguese guys just very much not connecting at that level. So my AD necessarily didn't disagree with me, but he said the manner in which I went about it wasn't great, right? So I could have voiced that to him in a one-on-one meeting, and then we could have taken it differently. At a certain point, though, you have to stand up for yourself if a coach is not treating you the right way. It's no different than life. And I think I went about it the wrong way in that scenario. But I put myself out there, and it's interesting. I learned from that experience later on. So our previous women's basketball coach was very micromanaging, very hard. Everything was an affront to her team. And at one point, I just put in an email and said, hey, coach, we're on the same team. So if we want to get better together, we've both got to communicate better together. I'm willing to do X if you're willing to do Y. And then ever since that moment, the level of respect changed, right? Because I confronted it in a much better way professionally this time. And then, she left this past year, and that was a hard coach for me to see leave because our relationship completely went from a kind of whatever. I kind of didn't care for it. And, that unfortunately sometimes can seep into how you cover the team, right? Because you're like, oh, if they lose, whatever, I don't like this coach or what have you. So trying to flip that a little bit and figuring out what's wrong in that scenario and then sticking up for yourself in a professional way, not the first way I did it, will go a long way. And then I got to know athletes on that team more. They would stop by in the office. That also kind of equalized some of the stress between myself and the coach. Once you started seeing, multiple players in our office just kind of talking, hanging out, talking about the games, things like that. So there's all sorts of ways to do it, but at a certain point, I think you just got to say to the other person across the aisle, like, look, you're not respecting me and we need to fix it. Standing up for yourself in the right way can go a long way.
I think this topic and what we've just spent the last hour chatting about, we could go on for several more, I think. And our three panelists have done a phenomenal job. And I want to close with this. If you guys could just all three give kind of your one selling point. What's one thing that these attendees should take from this panel on with them? Marissa, if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Oh, put me on the spot. This is like the coolest job that I never knew existed. Like, I didn't know this was a thing until I got to school, and I can't really imagine doing anything outside of college athletics. It's just such a unique and fun opportunity, and I'll plug D3 here. I think D3 is a really unique opportunity. I have 600 athletes I get to know every year, and I love watching them succeed on and off the court. I'm at the point now where I'm slightly old enough that they're getting married and having kids, and it's just such a cool experience to get to know them from the time they were 18 and on. And I think even sports information more that so than some other support related jobs in college athletics, you have a really unique opportunity to get to know almost each and every kid at a very personal level. And I just think sometimes I threaten to leave, but I always keep coming back. So I think it's just a really cool job.
Am I up? Is it me?
All you, Sydney.
Okay, I will. It is the coolest job. I would recommend having a hobby outside of sports, because come May time, you are sick of sports. I really am into mowing my lawn and getting my grass super green. So that's something you can do almost all year round, except when it's dead and brown in the winter time, which is fine because it's dark anyways after basketball games. So that's probably one of my biggest piece of advice is make sure you have an outlet outside of sports. We all get into this because we have some affinity with sports, and we like sports on a personal level, probably more than other people, but make sure you have an outlet that is not sports, because otherwise you're statting, a basketball game from the bleachers of your grandkids. Well, maybe not grandkids, your nephew's youth basketball game.
Yeah, it's hard to turn that off when you
Yes.
go to a little league game and you're like, why is the coach asking my niece to bunt with 2 outs? I would say for me, I think the part about this job that's awesome is the learning and networking. I feel like I'm always learning something new, and that keeps my brain going. But the networking, I think, everyone that's on this panel, we've all interacted with each other at, convention or learn from each other directly or indirectly. I can definitely say that, Lynn's work, I've definitely checked out over the course of, her time and just kind of see what she's doing at the different stops she's been at. So you just meet a whole variety of different people, and you kind of get to grow within a profession. As Sydney talked about, there's so many aspects of this job. You're good at some, not good at others. But you got to kind of learn and kind of develop yourself over the course of time. So those are the 2 big aspects for me, is the self-learning, and then also just getting to meet a lot of really cool people in an industry that, I mean, at the end of the day, we get paid to watch sports. So that's not the end of the world.
Oh, shoot, I thought one more. Find a mentor, whether it's to help you learn additional aspects of the job. As we have, but one of these questions here is, what's the best way to learn? Find someone to ask questions to, and that person also turns into a venting mechanism that sometimes you just need to vent to someone who gets it, right? Your partner, if your partner doesn't work in sports, or your parents don't have any idea of all the jobs you do, it's hard to vent to someone who doesn't understand it quite the same way as someone also in this profession.
Lynn, can I shamelessly plug the mentorship program?
Absolutely, Shawn.
I'm currently the chair of the CSC mentorship program. So as Sydney talked about, if you have questions about trying to obtain a mentor, we pair mentors and mentees based on a variety of asks or requests. If you want a D1 person, or if you want someone who's specifically good at basketball statting, or they're located in this area, what have you. But we usually do pairings in early August. We've had, a lot of success with that program, thanks to Teresa Kurtz, who's at the Mountain West. She's done a phenomenal job. She is moving on to do some other stuff. So big shoes to fill for sure. But she was really great at mentoring, or taking the pairings and putting them all together and kind of seeing, where everyone fits. So We have a ton of young individuals who go into that as mentees, and then they can do a ton of things in terms of requesting who they'd like to have as a mentor. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and be happy to help you with that process.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully I speak for all four of us on this call. You can find all of our contact information on the CSCU panel page where you signed up for the webinar. All of our bios are linked there. So if you have questions directed to any of us, want to reach out, if something Shawn said spoke to you, something Marissa said sparked your interest, please feel free to reach out to us. I know something about this industry too is people are always willing to help and willing to want to see you succeed and network and get to know each other. So we're going to wrap up here for today. This panel was phenomenal. Can't thank these three enough for joining me here today. Again, this session, we've been recording it, so it'll be on demand later today on the CSC website and YouTube channel. Make sure to follow up on that CSC U Summit schedule to join our other sessions. I believe there's still 3 more. Hopefully I got that correct, coming up tomorrow, including a breakout session that looks pretty legit. So we'll break you up and put some industry vets in the room with you, and you can ask them all the questions you want. So thanks again for hanging out with us today, and hopefully we were able to drop some nuggets of wisdom for you today. So thanks everyone. Have a good day.